What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mac, and on this episode, it's the bye week heading into week 3 of the Premier Lacrosse League, so I had to jump on and bring on my guys, Phil Rothermich and Jordan Johnson, back to the show. Guys, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me, man. Love being on here.
Happy to be back, buddy. Let's get it.
Yeah, like I said, 2 weeks down in the PLL. We're on a bye week this week before we head off to Baltimore in week 3. I'll be out there for week 3 live. I'll be able to watch these teams for the first time with my own eyes in person. So I'm super pumped about that. But we got a pretty loaded show for you guys today. We've got some stuff that we want to touch on. Obviously, if you've seen us on this show before, we always kind of get off topic at times, and that sparks just its own thing in itself. So we're going to cover a lot here over the next 30 minutes or so for you guys. But jumping right in, I want to get your guys' thoughts so far, just in general. It could be a specific player, a team, whatever is good, bad, anything else on these first 2 weeks in the PLL. And Phil, we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a few things, of course. I mean, many more than a few, but first thing that jumps to my mind is Paul Rabel back to being vintage Paul Rabel. I mean, in the championship series, I mean, I don't want to criticize anyone that's better than me at lacrosse, of course, but he was not great. That's putting it lightly. And I thought to myself, with that not being great, if he was not great this year, then maybe we're seeing kind of the end. He has proved me and many others wrong. He comes out and he's just been killing it. The next one is Rob Pennell. I mentioned in some of my tweets that Rob Pennell was going to added and might be helping, but he still was, that was seen with a lot of hate. What are you talking about, Pennell, all this. And I was going to be honest, was unsure, but I thought maybe a new scenery, things like that. And apparently that's what he needed, because Pennell's been great as well. And then the other thing is we got the chaos. Chaos last year started so slow, they lost however many games it was before the tournament. And that's why at one point I tweeted out they need to start fast and finish faster, because they can't have that again. Now here they are, 0-3, and I don't know the playoff system this year because they've changed it each year so far. However, you got to start to wonder, is that 0-3, are they now going to have to start chasing that playoff spot where everyone else is in the mix? Are they at that point where they're on the bubble and actually having to really work their tails off to have a chance to even make playoffs? I don't know. But those are the few things that come to mind for me in this really overly exciting season so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordan, what do you got?
I'm right there with you. You talk about Paul Rabel being back. How about the Cannons just in general? The 1-2 record, don't let that fool you. They've lost 2 1-goal games to 2 teams that I think are right there being the best 2 teams in the league, in the Redwoods and the Whipsnakes. Another kind of shocker, I wouldn't say, is Scarpello on the Water Dogs. He's been a really scrappy player that's come along these last few weeks. That's kind of shocked me. And when I first saw that he got signed in the offseason, I kind of said, what are we doing here? Just considering the amount of talent that's in the player pool that's still in it. We'll probably discuss that later. But Scarpello has been a pleasant surprise for me. You talk about the chaos, man. I don't know. This year, with it only being a 9-game season, and I believe it's the top 6 that go to the playoffs, is how the 4. I'm sorry, that makes sense. Top 6 or 7 that go to the playoffs. I think one team gets left out with the format, but it's a 9-game season, and you're 0-3. We might talk about this later, but whether it's trades, the player pool, and I don't know, this Canadian border situation doesn't look like it's getting better anytime soon. We can hope it will, with all this news of the hockey players being able to travel and whatnot, but I would think it's going to be at least another game or so before they can even talk about getting some of those Canadians in. And so they might be a team that we have to look at and say, do they need to make some moves here pretty soon?
Mm-hmm. And to your point, of course, I mean, the big one that we all want to see, Jeff T, #1 pick in the draft. Atlas picked him for a reason. They didn't pick him to put him on the bench and say, we've got plenty of guys, but no, they picked him to play day one. And unfortunately, we've missed many days and looks like we will continue to do so. But hopefully my man can show up at some point. The suspense is building. I'm sure he will live up to the hype, but we won't know until he's able to. It's not his fault, of course, but just would love to see that guy hit the field in that blue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, you guys touched on a lot of the stuff, not only that I had similar thoughts on for this segment, but even stuff that we're going to touch on in segment 2. And we even had a couple responses on Twitter. At Stevie Mac Media is my Twitter handle, from people that made comments that we'll get to later on in segment 3 to round out the show. But I think, and one of them is going to be touching on Paul Rabel and Rob Pennell and sort of their resurgence to start this year. We'll talk about that later in segment 2 in a couple minutes. But really for me, like you guys said, it's the Cannons really surprised me coming out these first 2 weeks. Again, that 1-2 record, like Jordan said, not really indicative of how good this team really is, because they took two of probably the better teams in the league, just like Jordan said, down to the wire, and even took the Whipsnakes to overtime. So I really think that as far as teams with a 500 or worse record right now goes, they're probably easily the best out of that bunch are the Cannons. But my second question I wanted to get to with you guys here in this first segment of the show is the Archers and their offense and the way that they've come out firing these first 2 weeks of the season. Only played 2 games, so like Jordan said, there's 9 games in the regular season, so still plenty of time left. But this team offensively is absolutely on fire shooting the ball right now. So do you think that this is just more of they have the kind of shooters to be able to do that, or do you see them kind of coming back down to earth here in week 3 and over the next few weeks? And Jordan, we can start with you on this one.
Well, I will say, and I hate to bring this point up, but we have to be realistic. They did the 2 teams that they did play were the Atlas and the Chaos, 2 of the, we'll say, lower teams in the league as of right now. With that being said, though, those guys have so much chemistry. Talk about the bunk bed boys, Will Manny, Marcus Holman, another year of Grant Ament playing with them. Tom Schreiber is going to be Tom Schreiber. He'll be the best player in the world until he's 40 years old, at least. Outside of Lyle, guys, don't start that debate, because we all know where Lyle is, and then Tom Schreiber's right there. And then you talk about bringing in a guy like Connor Fields, who just gives them so much versatility. And look, Connor Fields hasn't been getting as many runs now as he did back in 19 with the Chaos, but it's a long season. It's a long summer. But to be real, guys are going to get nicked up. You could see a weekend or so where, hey, wait, maybe Will Manny doesn't get every single run in the game, and you get a chance to use a guy like Connor Fields. That's where guys like Ryan McNamara, Ambler, guys that maybe aren't getting the runs that they're usually used to right away. But then as we get later towards the summer, guys are going to get nicked up. You're going to have, I wouldn't say load manage, but, you're kind of just going to have to manage some of your guys as you move towards the playoffs and whatnot. And so then we'll start to see a healthy dose of guys like Connor Fields, Mazzone, Trelly Harris could be playing some offense. Him as a short stick D midi, I've loved that move so far. But just in general, we're not seeing the bigger names getting their runs because on this Archers offense, they're so loaded. But later down the line in the summer, we're really going to start to see how much depth a team like the Archers has.
Yeah, how about you, Phil?
Yeah, so this Archers team, they added, I'll say this, they added some pieces on defense to get a little bigger. They added Jared Connors, who I think is one of the most people aren't realizing how big of a piece that is. But let's call it what it is. I mean, they're saying offense wins championships, not defense. I mean,
Well, you add Graham Hossack, who is the best defender in the league. People aren't going to say that right now, but at the end of the year, people will be guys who maybe haven't watched indoor, don't remember him from the Blaze back in the, well, not even back in the day because it was like 4 years ago, but back in the MLL, Graham Hossack. Getting Graham Hossack proves that you kind of want to buff up that defense. So I wouldn't quite say that, but
Well, yeah, I mean, they, like I said, they added some people on defense, and they added a long pole, and now they've got Scott Ratliff, and they've got Jared Connors, who are just freaks. I mean, Jared Connors won Midfielder of the Year, which is the first person since Joel White winning Midfielder of the Year as an LSM, which is just unbelievable. Just that's stupid. That's crazy, right? But you know, we got when you look at the Archers, originally you had Schreiber, you had Holman, you had Manny, and the thought was this team's unreal. It's unbelievable. They're going to be shooting at will. And then you add Grant Ament, which is one of the best feeders in college history, and at the same time can get it done himself. And you think, wow, how could it get better than this? And then they add Fields. And I mean, it's just been an ongoing process of building a star with the star with the star with the star. And what is so fun to me about the Archers is they look like they're playing backyard lacrosse, right? You look at the Whip Snakes, and it's like, we're business. We show up, we take care of business, we win, adios. We're going to go party with Rambo or something. But the Archers, on the other hand, I mean, they're flipping it behind the back. They're smiling. Will Manny's waving at guys on the other team to taunt them. They look like they're literally just all like a bunch of brothers out there just having a blast. But, you know, what we, you know, was already brought up by Jordan, of course, something I hadn't thought of, they've played Chaos and they've played Atlas. You know, not necessarily big dogs. You know, am I saying that Atlas can't heat up? I mean, maybe they will, but they're still not up there with some of the other teams. So I think this team will have a lot of firepower, still does, will be a threat to any defense. But we're not going to really know until they face someone like the Whip Snakes, who has a defense with, you know, one of the best defenders in the entire league, one of the best goalies in the entire league, and they've got a Fogo guy in Nardella that will keep getting the ball to the Archers' defense. So I would say I've heard people say it's the best offense in the league. I've heard people say it's the best offense ever in the PLL. I think it's yet to be seen. I think we need to see a little bit more competition before we can make and declare that as the best offense. But God bless, it is so much fun to watch. If they are on TV, click that mother lover on, because you're going to have a lot of fun with those behind the backs and those top cheddar shots all day long.
Yeah, I know. I think it was this past weekend when I was watching their game against Chaos, and just the way that they played in that second half. I believe they outscored the Chaos in that second half about 5 or 6 to 1 in that half. Just the way their offense played, Phil, like you said, they just look like they're having fun out there. It's like it just looks like the game comes so easy to them, and they have that chemistry, like you said, where they know where their guy's going to be, when he's going to be there. So the ball just kind of flies around all the time. So it just leaves the defense with their head spinning. And I may have said this on Monday's episode of the podcast, that they have an offense now, like you said, where I believe we've talked about in the past how it's almost like an arms race when you talk about the offenses in this league, just building up those shooters, building up those playmakers. The more you have, the better it's going to be, because that's really what this offense to me is. They have guys where the shots are just coming at every angle. And if you go back and watch that Atlas game, Jack Kincannon had like 0 chance in net in that game until he came back in the second half a little more dialed in. But they could have just stepped across midfield, shot it, and scored on him. I mean, that's how dialed in their shooters were that day. But I'm glad that, Phil, you brought up mentioning the Archers defense. This to me might be the best their defense has been, at least at the start of this season. I think this is the best defense that Chris Bates has had on that unit. So when you couple that with the offensive firepower that they possess, they are going to be, I think, moving forward, a very scary team when you talk about that top 3, top 4 in the PLL. But we're going to step aside for just a moment. When we come back, segment 2 of the show, I've got a couple questions that I want to ask Jordan and Phil. We're going to talk a little bit about the Atlas some more. Then I'll talk to them about the Cannons. We'll revisit that discussion that Phil kind of touched on in segment 1 about Paul Rabel, Rob Pennell. But you're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, guys, welcome back to Taking the Field with Stevie Mac. I mentioned before the break, we talked a lot about the Archers, the Atlas, the Cannons, teams like that, from what we've seen from them these first 2 weeks of the season. Now I've got a couple questions, here in segment 2 that I want to ask Jordan and Phil. We're going to touch a little bit more on the Atlas. We're going to talk about the Cannons. And then Phil kind of teased in segment 1 that topic about Paul Rabel and Rob Pennell. So I want to get their thoughts a little bit more in depth on that. But the first question I want to get with you guys here in segment number 2 of the show is that in the past, I've advocated so much for Joel Tinney to get touches on offense for the Atlas, even dating back to the championship series last summer. And he still hasn't gotten them. And I've even had guys like Coach Shrek, who's a friend of ours, friend of the show, tweeting at me during games asking where he is on the offense because he's just not out there. So what I want to ask you guys about Joel Tinney is, does he get traded here in 2021? Because I feel like as an Atlas fan, he just doesn't have a role with Ben Rubior's team. So Phil, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I think Tinney is a threat. He's a great player. He's fast. He's quick. One of his moves is he likes to dodge, go down the alley, and switch hands so he has a better angle and dump it in the goal. And he is effective. He gets goals. In 2019, I think we saw him quite a bit out there playing. Last year is a little less. This year it's a little less. I think Atlas, I don't know if they don't have a part for him in their idea, their scheme. I mean, right now you're looking at people like Dox and Costabile that can go both sides of the field, true two-way middies. And Tinney's not really a defensive guy. I don't know. But in any event, he's a threat. He's a good player. So I think you either got to put him in there and trust him, or you got trade bait. Dump him off for another player, or put him out there for some more draft picks next year. We all know Atlas loves draft picks. My Lord, they pick them up as many as they can by the handful. So, you got to do something, because him sitting on the bench, he's just collecting dust. He's a better player than that, and he should be on the field because he's going to make any team a little bit better.
Yeah, and Jordan, real quick before we jump over to get your thoughts on this, Phil, you talked about having guys like Costabile and Dox Aikens there. Joel Tinney was actually left off the week 2 roster in Atlanta in favor of Dox Aiken for the Atlas this past weekend. So again, like you said, having him just either A, sitting on the sideline, not really seeing a whole lot of playing time, or B, even just like in the case this past weekend, sitting at home on the couch watching from home, not really, I think, the best use of a guy like that, who I believe if you go back to 2019, their analytics department said he was like this number 2 most efficient dodge to feed midfielder in the game that year. So when you have a guy like that, and especially last year with the struggles that they had offensively, being able to move the ball and also move themselves with their bodies on the field, having a guy not on the field that can open things up for you like that, I think was definitely something that they were missing. And like I said, when I teased this segment, I've talked about it 1,000,001 times, but it's still true to this very day. But Jordan, I want to get your thoughts on it as well.
So I will agree with you guys in the fact that Tinney is a good player and he is an offensive threat. You talked about how Rubier had him playing more defense back in the bubble. And I don't think that was by coincidence, and I don't think that was because of the numbers. I think Rubier might have done that, and this is just purely speculation, by the way, guys, is that he may have done that to kind of get Tinney to play into the two-way mindset that he's had for this year. You guys talked about Dox, Costabile. They traded for a guy like Brent Adams who can go both ways. And frankly, I think that should have been kind of Tinney's wake-up call. I'm not sure if it was or wasn't. I'm not sure, and this is certainly not a shot at him. But that was kind of his wake-up call, like, hey, if you want to make this team, you got to be able to play well on both sides of the ball. And for as much as Tinney is a good player on offense, I just frankly do not think he is quite there defensively yet, especially when you talk about guys like Dox, like Brent Adams, like Costabile, who are just far better defenders than Joel is. Not a knock on him, it's just a reality. And you talk about trading. This is the thing with these trades is you got to have it takes two to tango, right? You got to have a home for them. And when you look across the board, you see a team maybe with chaos trades for him until they get some of the Canadians back. But even with that as a fit, even whether you talk about offensively or defensively, they already have guys like Lassini and Resch. You talk about offensively, I don't know how much Andy Towers really wants to tinker with that too much until they start to see more of these Canadians and just until they get into a flow. Beyond that, it's really kind of hard to say that to find a landing spot for him. So he may just be one of those guys that, hey, look, he's going to have to, sit back like a lot of other guys in this league, unfortunately, with the merger, who going to have to sit back, keep working at it until they get an opportunity somehow in some way, whether it's he ends up sitting and I guess would fall into the restricted roster category. Maybe somebody picks him up that way. But, in terms of potentially trading an asset or a draft pick for a guy like Joel Tinney, I'm not sure a team that's going to be out there is going to be willing to do that, especially, a guy like Tinney who, depending on how much he gets used or whatnot, could be potentially sitting in the player pool, later in the year for somebody to pick up for a playoff run. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And just, I think Atlas right now very clearly is looking for the two-way midi, which makes sense. Those are a little bit tough to come by these days. It's kind of like everyone's like, oh, I play offense midi, I play defense midi. Dox and Costabile and Brent Adams can play both ways. They can. And I think putting Tinney on defense, when he did that, I think it was a mistake because I think Tinney is not that big. I mean, I'm not that big, but, I'm not going to try to play out there. I think him playing out there is a little bit tough on him too. And then, like we were all just saying there, that goes back to the Atlas looking for those two-way middies. So you get stuck.
That is the thing about this league, and I'm sure we'll get into this when we talk about trades and whatnot, is it's one of those things with the merger this year. There are a lot of great players who have one specialty thing. I mean, we just saw Cuccinello get cut, from the Water Dogs, and he's a guy who I think can still play. He's a guy I think that should get picked up. Will he? I don't know, because he's a Dodger from X, and he does a lot of his work from X. Can he come out of the box? Yeah. But he just frankly hasn't over the last couple of years. Whether that's his fault or not, I'm not sure. But but that's the thing that's going to be tough this year is with the merger, with only 8 teams. A lot of these good players, a lot of these great players who maybe only have one specialty. Whether it's on offense or defense. If it's an offensive player, maybe they're only good on the crease, or a defensive player, they're better one-on-one. And in this league, you got to have guys that can do everything. You got to have the offensive player, the attackman that can be behind X, be on the crease, or be on the outside, get you twos. Or you have to have a midfielder that can go both ways. You talk about the face-off guy that can go score as well. The defensive guy that can push transition. So if you were a guy previously who, made a living on one particular thing, you're seeing those type of guys who are either struggling right now where they're playing, or they're just not on a roster right now, which is unfortunate because they're great players, but it's just the way this league is working right now. That's just the reality of the situation, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with everything you said, Jordan, about how if you're going to play a certain position, you got to be able to do this, and this. It can't just be you do this exclusively. You got to be a little more flexible. And that is something that when he first came into the Atlas, Ben Rubio said is he wants guys that can be able to do that. They can be slotted in at different positions. They can play different roles. They have different specialties, like you said, that they can do. They're not just specifically one thing. And I think that's sort of what he's building towards here in year 2, and it'll probably take into 2022 for him to fully get what he wants out of that and to get that team looking the way that he wants it. But I think so far, even just through 2 games, you can kind of see, especially after that Redwoods game in week 2, that there is sort of a vision there. There is a plan in place, and they're slowly kind of churning that out. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the Atlas play moving forward. They do have 2 big games coming in week 3 in Baltimore, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tinney moving forward, whether he continues making the, I believe it's the 19-man game day roster or not. Like I said to Phil, he didn't make it this past weekend. But as we move along here in segment 2 on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, if you missed any of segment 1, if you jumped ahead in the show, you can go back and check that out as well. But the next question for you guys here is, and we kind of touched on this in segment 1 a little bit, is are the Cannons right now the best team with a 500 or worse record? Phil talked about it a lot, that 1-2 record, but not really totally, and I think Jordan, you touched on this too, not totally indicative of where this team is, at least through the first 2 weekends. And Jordan, we can start with you.
100%. I said it after the game. They are 100% a playoff team. They're a team that can give the Whipsnakes a run, as you saw in that game. I think they are literally like 1 or 2 pieces away. You know, you talk about the offense there with Lyle, with Rabel and his comeback. You know, Ryan Drenner is going to do Ryan Drenner things. Andrew Q, who a lot of people, kind of slept on coming into the year, who's been doing this for a while here, especially with the Bayhawks. I got to see that right in my backyard. Him playing with Lyle. And then you talk about just Rafis coming in as a rookie who, frankly, is probably right now the steal of the draft. And that's on him being a good player, and a lot on we haven't been able to see these draft picks yet. And then defensively, yeah, I'm not going to lie. I've seen a lot more Brody Merrill than I thought I would at 39 years old. And that's not a slight on Brody Merrill, because he is the greatest defenseman of all time, and at least in pro lacrosse. And, you know, coming into what would likely be his last year, I did not think we were going to get this version of Brody Merrill, who I think he either leads the league in ground balls or is right up there on the top 5. And, you know, he's really been the leader of this Cannons defense. And then you talk about Morocco, who's just been playing out of his mind as a goalie, just been a brick wall. Yeah, I think the Cannons are a team that they are really, in my eyes, one more good defenseman away from being up there with the Redwoods, the Whipsnakes, and whatnot. I mean, we can already put them in that conversation. But God, if they go get another guy that can be a number 1 or number 2 defenseman, man, this team could really go get on a roll. And I could really see them in championship weekend, man.
Yeah, Phil, how about you?
Yeah, you know, the Cannons are they're rocking, man. In the bottom half of the PLL right now in the standings, they're the only one in the bottom half to have a positive goal differential. Like, that's amazing. Like, they are rocking. And the thing is, they have got a veteran at every spot. So they've got Lyle at the attack, they've got Rabel at the midfield, they got Brody at the defense. So they have someone that is the captain of it, you know, someone that the team can look to and kind of see what's going on with them. If things are bad, if they're good, if they're not sure, okay, this is the guy. That's the guy that I need to go find. Of course, like you said, I mean, Q, Drenner, Lyle, I mean, those guys all know how to play. They do great. Drenner, for some reason, at this point, has been on 3 teams. I can't figure it out because every team he seems to do pretty good. Lyle is just he's Lyle. We all know that name because of how good he is. Rabel turning on the Jets has been unbelievable. This team has really, and Merrill, Brody, like you said, his aggression has turned up. Now, he hurt Michael Sowers. We hate to see that. He's gotten a couple penalties. You know, that's no good. But he has turned it on in a big way. I mean, the man is playing like his life depends on it, and he's doing it great. So this Cannons team, what I think is so impressive, is when you have a team shows up. Guys have never played together. They don't really know each other as well. They probably know each other here or there, but that's it. And this team managed to come together and click. Do they have 2 losses? Yes. Are they both by losses by 1 goal? Yeah. That's how close they were as a team that just showed up on the scene versus the Redwoods. I have the Redwoods as my number 3 team, And my power rankings, I know other people have have them at 2, but that's a team. And then they played the Whip Snakes, took it down to a 1-goal game. And that we should all agree on is a 1 or 2 team, the Whip Snakes. I have them at 1. Some people have them at 2, whatever. But the point is, this team showed up on the scene. They meshed, they clicked, veterans picked up the slack, and now they are a dangerous team. Well, 1 goal away from big-time teams, they click this much more, and that's a team that could be a championship weekend very easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you guys totally nailed it with this team. I know that they were, through these first 2 weeks, probably my surprise team so far because I wasn't all that high on them, admittedly, going into that first weekend because, again, they were kind of that unknown. Like you said, Phil, they barely played together. There's not a ton of familiarity there. So you wanted to see, okay, how are the veteran guys like Merrill and Rabel and all those guys going to mesh with some of those younger players? And I think they've done it phenomenally, excuse me. And I think that they are 1-2 right now, but they're probably not going to lose too many more games going forward because they're only going to get better from here. And I think for the rest of the league, that's a really scary thought to have. But I'm going to push this last question that I've got for you guys into segment 3. We're going to finish up here in this final segment in just a moment. But when we come back, we're going to get to some of the comments that I received on Twitter. Again, at Stevie Mac Media is the Twitter. You guys can follow me there for all PLL stuff. I also post a ton about the podcast there as well. And then we'll also kind of touch a little bit on this upcoming weekend in about a week from now in Baltimore for week 3 in the PLL. But you're watching Taking the Field with Stevie Mac.